anywhere. I was like terrified of it. So I was like, we're going to have a go. We're going to make some notes and stuff. And then the rest is just winging it a little bit. But it helps if it's a friendly audience where you can go back.
I went to see a load of accountants. I went and did a keynote for an accountancy thing for a friend. And so I was like, right, because everyone else was going to be reading. So I'm like, let's try reading. But I kept wandering off because I want to interact with an audience. So I kept leaving my laptop and go, I better go back to that now. And it's like, so what I realized afterwards, you have to do one of two things. You have to not read and just talk, or read everything.
Yeah.
And then you're monotone, stood there, can't move.
You sound like a robot. Right?
You do, yeah.
Yeah.
So I hated it. So I told Matt, our investment manager, he's like, you're so much better winging it. Why did you read us? I was like, I tried something different. Didn't work. Won't do it again. It was dreadful. To the point where I was like, I'm not even entertained. I did get 2 jokes out of an accountancy audience. So that's, I think already you might win the award for best hair on the podcast. Awesome hair or what? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bravo. I don't think anyone's ever complimented my hair on the podcast. Can't win either way because I've got crap hair and you won't let me wear hats.
Oh, you've got good hair.
Thanks. I was digging for the compliment. Should probably start by telling people who you are and what we do. No, what you do. Who you are and what you do.
So I'm Dimple. I'm the CEO at NatureMetrics. So NatureMetrics, we're here to make biodiversity measurable at scale. So we're a nature data company and we help organizations from corporate to government actually monitor their impact on the ground in terms of species and health of ecosystems.
When we first met and you told me a little about your backstory, I was immediately like, how quickly can we get you on the podcast? Because you have the most amazing story. Can you take people through almost your career contents page? If you reached up for a book of, in fact, not just career, life, what are those main defining chapters that you could take us through?
Yeah. So I grew up in the north of England. I am the daughter of immigrants. My parents, and this is very relevant for NatureMetrics, my parents actually are farmers by background from a really rural part of India and moved to the UK when they were like 16 and, had to work incredibly hard for a living. And I grew up on a council estate. So I'd kind of come from a background where hard work was really ingrained into what you do and what was required to actually be able to progress in your life. I was very fortunate to go through school on scholarships, and that got me a place at Cambridge. And that's where everything really started to change, because it threw me into a world where I was out of place all the time.
So just pause there a sec. What does hard work really mean in that context? Bring that to life for people.
So, what I saw my parents doing was, there was a lot of physical hard work. There was a lot of long hours. And I think what's been really interesting is you keep pushing. You have those really hard days. We grew up in a place where people were, I would say, at least on a monthly basis, putting bricks through our windows. And, at one point they burnt our house down. Like, you pick yourself up, you carry on.
How sat literally in the ashes of that happening, how mentally and emotional did they pick things up and keep going again?
I think it's all they knew. I think they were so grateful to have the opportunity to build a new life for themselves. And I think they were also just very aware of how different they were. And I think we also have to remember that this was the 80s. It was, the north of England. It was an ex-coal mining estate.
Wasn't time, place, was it?
It wasn't. And, I look back on it now in a very, very different way. But at the time, it's all we knew. I'd wake up in the morning and there'd be a sign on my bedroom door saying, wear shoes in the living room. And I knew that meant that there was glass everywhere. But my parents were like, well, I've got to get the corner shop open. And me and my sisters, when we were like 6, 7, 8 years old, would sweep up the glass and then carry on with your day and wait for someone to come fix the window. It just, and I think when you're at that age and that's all you've ever known, you just find a way to carry on.
That's amazing. You use the word fortunate about scholarships, but fortune in there hides a huge amount of hard work, a huge amount of commitment. Like, you read everything as a kid, right?
Yes, I loved books. For me, books were the escape from the world that I lived in.
And did you recognize that at the time that you needed to escape?
I think I enjoyed the escape as opposed to the need to escape, but I knew that that was not a life that I wanted for myself. And it was really a case of actually, I had an amazing imagination and being able to kind of build that through stories and fall in love with characters and start to kind of imagine a future for yourself that was something other than where you're living today. And I learned a huge amount about the world through books as well. But for me, reading was also knowledge and information. And I would literally read everything. We had newspapers in the shop. So I would read the newspapers every day. I would read the shampoo bottles. Like, it was literally anything I'd get my hands on, I would read and learn. And that really is the basis for then having, access to the scholarships and being able to, get an education in a way that I otherwise would have really struggled to get.
And were your parents pro that education side of things when you said, you had these aspirations to go to the most incredible universities in the world? Were they pro that as an idea?
So I didn't actually know any of these universities existed until I was probably about 13, 14 years old. My parents actually were very pro education. And this is what made them really different at the time. Because when I was growing up, Indian girls learn how to cook. And, you grow up to be married off and then you raise a family. And that was very much kind of the confined within which people in that community operated. And my dad was very different. He really valued education. And he was like, we're going to put education first. You don't need to learn how to cook. I refused to learn how to cook. For me, that was like my act of rebellion, which is not so useful now because I still can't cook. But because I knew that I had, in some ways, his sponsorship, that really gave me the cover to be a little bit different. And, there was never really an aspiration of, I want to go to Cambridge. I didn't know what Cambridge was. It was just, I want to do the best that I can do. And every time one door opens, you kind of see the next and you say, okay, that's my next goal. And then from there, the next one. But there was a lot of it that was just working it out as I went. We didn't even have the internet back then.
I remember. Did you celebrate the wins along the way? So, you don't get to where you went without amazing exam results. So did you pause and celebrate the GCSEs and the A-levels, or was it just what next?
What are you celebrating? Like, you haven't actually changed your life at that point. You've got a piece of paper with a few grades on it. And I know that looks very different now. Like, when my kids get their GCSEs and A-levels, it'll be, the most amazing party. But actually, my life hadn't changed. I was still the same kid growing up in the same house with the same struggle. It just, I had a piece of paper that would help me get the next piece of paper, which might help me get a job one day. So I don't think I actually started celebrating anything until I got to Cambridge. And I think that's the point that you can kind of say, I feel safe celebrating this because I feel like this is now going to turn into something. But at GCSEs and A-levels, it wasn't really anything at that point. Like, it was still too easy to slip back into the world that I came from. And I think some of that is, at what point do you feel comfortable and safe enough to recognize the progress that you have made? And that came quite late.
So when you first put your feet on the ground in Cambridge, was that, I'm excited to be here? Was that pressure? Was that, I've made it? Was it, oh God, I need to fight to stay here? How did you feel?
Terrified.
But with a big smile.
I did not speak their language at all. I didn't understand any of the cultural references. I hadn't read, I'd read loads of books. I just hadn't read the books that everyone else had read. I felt really out of place. I didn't know how to use a cutlery at the massive, massive tables that looked like the Grand Hall at Hogwarts. And it took me a long time to settle in and feel like I had earned my place being there. And I think what was really interesting is that my brain was just wired slightly differently to people that had been to St. Paul's or Westminster or Dulwich or Habs, because I'd had to work a lot of it out myself. But it meant that to some degree, my foundations were slightly weaker. So when I'd gone into the interview, a lot of the the point of the interview to test raw potential. And so clearly they had detected raw potential in me, but it was really unrefined, right? And I think that first term, meeting people that had been schooled a certain way, that had mental frameworks that they could draw on, they communicated a certain way, they put their argument forward much more articulately than I did, just made me realize how much work I had to do. And I would say probably the end of the first year that I settled in, realized I absolutely loved it. Like I really thrived on, I guess, the intellectual challenge. And there was a real sense of, like, that was the first point at which I felt like there was opportunity in life. Like I could walk out of there and do things that I had never imagined before, that like I actually had enough autonomy to be able to shape my own future. And Cambridge was that turning point that provided that for me.
So you said you had a really active imagination from the reading. So can you remember at the end of that first year, what was the life you were imagining? Where did you think you might be or go?
So I think there was always a part of me that wanted to, I don't want to say change the world because it sounds really naive, but have an impact. Like it was a point at which I realized it wasn't ever going to be a 9-to-5 job. Like I turn up, I do a job, I go home, which actually was a life that I had imagined for myself when I was much younger. It was really this sense of, I could build something meaningful. Like I could do something that makes life better for other people. And I would say this is where I really developed that sense of purpose. Because up to that point, I'd just been running. I'd been running away from where I grew up. I'd been running towards some, at that point, fairly ambiguous future. But at that point, it was, I can shape something that makes even this trajectory that I've been on at least more accessible for other people as well.
Statements like change the world or achieve something huge never sounds disingenuous from someone who means it. So when you said it, I wasn't like, oh, that sounds ridiculous. I was like, yep, she's going to do that. That makes sense. Where does the sense of wanting to help other people and almost that sense of service and positive impact, where does that come from? Do you know?
I think what was really interesting about growing up was my parents are not well off. And I think I had a really meaningful upbringing. You know, I had a lot of very strong and valuable relationships in my life with my family, with my friends. And I think that really taught me to look beyond money and finances. And obviously, you know, financial security is important. And I know what it feels like to not have that. But being able to provide that to somebody and it being more than just money in their bank account, actually being able to see that this means that they can sleep better at night. They're able to celebrate occasions with their loved ones in a slightly different way. Or
takes the worries away, doesn't it?
Yes, it takes the worries away. And it doesn't take a lot. You know, you don't need to be a millionaire. Actually, a lot of millionaires are deeply unhappy. But for me, it was that sense of you can give people something that really radically changes what they're able to get from their lives. And having experienced some of that myself at that point made me realize that there were a lot of people out there that just didn't experience that. And I went to India a lot growing up. My parents would take us back every summer. And, you know, I'm talking like proper rural village India where all of their bathroom facilities are hole in the ground outside. You don't have electricity for many hours of the day. And that was the first time I went, I was 13, and it was so jarring. I went there and realized that all of these values and norms within which I was kind of living my life and operating didn't actually exist there. And at that point, it was like, okay, there's a whole set of kind of gender biases and stereotypes within which a lot of these women are living. And I think at that point, there was a sense of, I don't know if they will escape that. I don't know if their lives will change. I don't know whether they even have the opportunity to think or dream of anything different in 20 or 30 years. And I think that was the point at which I realized that I've got the opportunity to dream of a different future, and that in itself is a privilege. But if I'm able to then give that to somebody else, that's actually an incredible gift. So it was, just kind of growing up across all of those different worlds, and building a view of what is possible and what I can do to contribute towards some of those changes as well.
That's really inspiring. So we're now settled, we're happy at Cambridge, we finished year 1, we're going into year 2. Take us through the rest of that experience and how it was a launch pad for the career that came.
Yeah. I had lots of student debt.
Pertinent topic at the minute for people, right?
That's really, really important to highlight, because I think it's a reality for a lot of people today, but definitely people from my background. And I had to start thinking about what I wanted to do as a career. And I had not got that far yet in terms of exploring what was possible. And to some degree, I just kind of rode the conveyor belt of what everybody else doing my course or, my friends were doing. And they were all starting to apply for internships. So typically what you found with anybody studying economics was, at that point, they either wanted to go into investment banking or they wanted to go into accounting or consulting. So it was one of the three. I went through the whole application process of trying to get an internship, which was incredibly difficult.
So no AI, obviously, at this stage. Like, internet was there, but would have been not fast, high-speed stuff yet.
Yeah. And I'd never done this before. No one had ever told me how to write a CV, what to wear to an interview, how to answer any of the, tell us about a time when questions, or even how to show up in those situations. And I faced rejection after rejection after rejection, to the extent that actually there was one final stage interview I got to where I'd been interviewed by a partner on my birthday. And they rejected me in the end because they didn't believe that I went to Cambridge. So they thought I had lied on my CV, which I think was a bit of a wake-up call for me.
I haven't thought about this in 20 years. I do not have the academics you have by any stretch, so my experience was very different. But I came out of uni, first PhD, went to an interview, and they were like, "Oh, well, we really want someone with a PhD, but who's in their early 20s." And I was like, "What? How do you?"
The maths.
No. And they were like, "Well, just because you can't do it doesn't mean someone else can't." And I was like, "Okay, have a lovely day." And it struck me they had no idea what they were asking for, and so they kind of similar situation.
Yeah, and I think I had been so optimistic at that point, and this was when the work hard fallacy started to kick in, because it's like, oh, it's not enough to work hard. Actually, there's a different game afoot here, and I don't know how to play this game.
How on earth you managed to be optimistic with what, by any objective measure, was an incredibly challenging, hardworking, difficult childhood? Yes, clearly loving and with some great parts of it, but you had to work really hard.
Yeah.
You've worked hard for 2 decades to get to this point. Yet so optimistic. That's amazing. Because lots of people would carry a chip on their shoulder at that point. And I have a lot of friends who went to Oxford or Cambridge and really hated it because of that sort of financial divide, that not understanding the language and things. But you came out of it with optimism.
I had nothing to lose at this point. Genuinely, when you've grown up on a council estate, you've had the childhood that I've had, and you know that taking a step back is still not going to put you there, then, what's the worst that can happen?
Completely
and I think
agree.
There is something incredibly powerful in that, because it's actually the reason why I started my first business as well. It's like, what's the worst that's going to happen? It will fail. I'll take a job at Sainsbury's.
Yeah, my answer is, I'm not supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be in a factory, working 12-hour shifts, making kitchen doors. That's the only employment where I'm from.
But it's also why people like us are the people that should be building businesses, because we don't just represent that 1%. We're not just building for the 1%. We actually see the world for what it is. And we understand all of the nuances and complexities that you've got to navigate to do something meaningful. So it was just, what's the worst that can happen?
So where did the first opportunity come?
So I got an internship at Goldman. So I got rejected from every other bank on the street, but Goldman Sachs took me.
Why did they say yes?
I've reflected on that moment. And I think by that point, I was so fed up that I remember there was one interview question where they asked me something, and we'd had a good conversation so far. And I just said, I don't know. I don't know, but this is what I'm going to do to find out. And it was the most direct answer I had given in any of the interviews so far. And actually, I think that's why they were like, okay, this is interesting. Like, I pushed back a little bit more.
You also became an equal at that point.
I think so. And actually, when I joined, I realized that is the culture. They look for exceptional people, not because they are polished, but because of what they're able to deliver and become. And so me saying, I actually have no idea, but I will tell you how we're going to find out. And then I went away and I think I sent an email and said, by the way, I found out and here it is. I think it was that initiative that probably made me stand out. And the beauty of that is I had that initiative all along. That wasn't something that Cambridge had given me. And so that was really the inflection point. Because, I mean, if you've got an offer on the table from Goldman, you've got a pretty good starting point.
How long did we spend there?
I did my internship. I then went off and did a master's and then came back into a full-time role. And so I walked in 2008 when things were colourful, I think is probably the best way to put it. And I spent just short of 3 years there, but in a very, very chaotic period.
What do you like the most about it?
What do I like most about it? So there was a real sense of, I was on the trading desk. There was a real sense of ownership from day one, right? If you make a trade, you own the risk, you hedge the risk, and you own the outcome. And if that is your first job, and those are the parameters within which you're operating, that is incredibly formative. And then the other part was we'd had no idea what was going to happen day to day in that period. I mean, you were just waiting for the next wild headline to hit. And there was something about operating in that environment where you had imperfect information, you had to piece things together. It was fairly high adrenaline, high stakes. I loved that. I found that I really thrived in that environment and that I was able to piece together those data points in a way that other people couldn't. And I think that taught me a lot about myself in terms of what my potential superpower could be, but what I should be building on in the future as well. Then it all calmed down. So
and you got bored?
Yeah, a bit. Yes. And then it became, steady state. It was much more risk averse. There was much more regulation coming in, rightly so, given the origins of the crisis that we'd just been through. But it needed a very different type of person, I think, to do well in that environment. And I realized that I wanted to do something that had a little bit more of that ambiguity, that had intellectual challenge, where I was doing something I didn't necessarily know what the outcome of that was going to be. So I started looking at building a business. I think there was a part of me that had always wanted to do that.
Did you, how have you slept at various chapters throughout your life? Have you always slept like easily and well?
So I always say, and I found out that there is, but I have always said that if there was an Olympic event for sleeping, I would get the gold medal.
You're good at sleeping?
I am so good at sleeping.
And have you always been?
Yeah, like a dead person.
That's impressive.
Even when I had kids. It was much harder when I had the kids.
Yeah.
It also meant that when my sleep was broken, I really, really struggled. So when I was at Goldman, I would sleep really well, but I wasn't getting enough of it. So
how many hours a night in that period?
On a good night, I would get maybe 5.5. On a bad night, I'd get 3. And over time, I mean, bearing in mind you don't really take your holidays either, that compounds.
Yeah.
And I really, really struggle when I'm not having enough sleep.
The nature of the question is, I didn't sleep until I had an intellectually challenging job. Because I'd try and sleep and my brain would be like, no, I'm still here. What can we talk about? Let's do something else. Let's just be occupied. Whereas as soon as I got into senior roles, people would be like, oh, do you worry and struggle? I'm like, nope, I'd never slept better.
Yeah.
And now I'm gone within 30 seconds of like head hitting the pillow because I've tired my brain out that day. I can't, you mentioned about you wanted the ambiguity and you crave the intellectual challenge. Without it, I'm a nightmare.
Yes. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think, there's a part of it where you do still have to have healthy boundaries. So even now, I find that if I'm working really late, I cannot sleep because I go to bed completely wired, exhausted, but wired. So I'm like that overtired baby. Whereas, like you say, on the days when I'm on holiday, I'm the first person up. I'm the last person to sleep. My entire family will be asleep around me. And I'm like, well, do I read something? Like, what do I do? I don't want to wake everyone up. So I agree with that. I think there's just something about even just physically making sure you've exercised and all of that stuff, but mentally, when you are used to working in those situations where you have to spend a lot of time really stretching your brain, when you have a lazy day, it kind of just sits there twiddling its thumbs when you're trying to go to sleep.
It does. So build that first business for us.
Yeah. So first business, this is the crazy stuff that you only do in your early 20s, right? So I decided I was going to start business while I was still trading at Goldman. And I fully expected this business to fail.
Are you allowed to do that, by the way, in theory?
Oh, yes, but it was completely unrelated business. Yeah. So it was in the hospitality space. If I tried to start a fintech or something, then there'd have been issues. But, bricks and mortar business, took on a failed coffee chain and just thought, simple business model. There's no algorithms. I'll do the algorithm while I'm at Goldman. But actually, they're just real world stuff.
How did you even know it was available or a thing, or how did you come?
I spent a little bit of time looking around. I didn't have a lot of capital or access to capital to build a new business from scratch as well. So, just being very aware of that rather than kind of trying to embark on an 18-month fundraising process that inevitably would have failed. We were also in a recession. And the reality,
opportunities,
distressed assets. So I was like, well, I've got a small amount that I've saved up, really tiny. Like in startup world, it's basically nothing. But I'm going to take on this distressed asset and I'm going to see what I can do. And if I can get this to profitability, that teaches me enough to then think about how I can scale this further. That was it. That was the only goal. It was start with these 2 stores. Somebody else has shut them down because they couldn't get them to work. If you're able to get them to work, brilliant, because you've beaten what the last person did. And if they actually really work, then there's a full company here to be built. And so Monday to Friday, I was working at Goldman, and then Saturday, Sunday, I was on the shop floor making coffees and trying to work out how to hire people and run a team, build P&Ls, all of this kind of stuff. They're 2 wildly different worlds. And I did them both in parallel for about 9 months. But then the coffee shop became profitable. And at that point, I thought, okay, we've got something that can be replicated here. I also knew that I wanted a life that had a little bit more flexibility. I was at the trading desk from before 6:30 in the morning until 8-9 o'clock in the evening. And that is not sustainable. It's not sustainable if you want a family. It's not, I knew that there was a ceiling that I was going to hit very quickly at Goldman. Whereas as an entrepreneur, you have your own challenges, but one thing that you do have is much more autonomy over your time. So I then started to think about this as a company. What is our brand? What are we trying to build? What's our USP? And started pitching some large institutional landlords. And we got 5 sites lined up, one of which was Westfield, London. And at that point, I was like, okay, I need to raise some proper funding for this. And it's time to
Was anyone helping you through this process? Because you're doing a lot of things there that you've never done before. Information isn't as prevalent as it is now. So did you have people around you that were helping you with this? How did you find your way through that complexity?
So my husband and I started this business together. And we didn't have a lot of mentors. I mean, he had a very similar upbringing to me, in the north of England. He also was working in banking. And we reached this impasse largely because we knew that one of us would have to quit. And we couldn't agree who quits.
How many times did you ever go at that conversation?
So it was like, well, what are my prospects like compared to yours? And then it's like, if we want to have kids, what does that look like? And because we couldn't get to a point where one of us would step away, it was like, well, we need to build something where both of us can step away, and then we'll take it from there.
The moral of that story is people often think there's 2 choices in life, like an A and a B, and the beauty comes in any scenario. What's the third option?
Yes.
Unless one of them's perfect, find the other one, because the other one in every scenario might be the best one.
Yes. And, we look back on that so much now thinking, would we have made the same decision? And, he's the CEO of a coffee chain now. And, there are points now where our lives are chaos. But I don't think we would do it differently. We started a family shortly after starting that company. There were babies being passed backwards and forwards while we were scaling that. And we learned a huge amount in doing it. But actually we're in a position where we scaled that chain to 37 stores nationally and sold it to private equity. It was our first business.
What's that time period over?
7 years.
That's incredibly quickly, right?
And, in that point, we started a family, had 2 kids, there was a lot happening. We put everything into it. And I remember when we sold that company looking at what am I going to do next? And we agreed that we definitely shouldn't work together anymore.
Was that hard, working together?
It worked at that point in time because of the children. So I took 2 weeks mat leave after each child, right? Your own business, who's going to fill in? And it gave us the flexibility that we needed to be able to do everything. It is also really, really difficult to invest in your marriage when you are learning to co-parent and you're building your first business together. And we worked really, really well together, and we were so opposites. And actually that really helped. But I think we became very, very good business partners and very, very good co-parents. That, we kind of got to the point after selling the business where it was like, actually, what is the right thing for us going forward? And the girls were older. They were, I think about that point, they were both in kind of nursery or preschool. So their routines were settled. They had seen me / both of us every single day of the first 3 to 5 years of their lives. And to be able to do that is incredible. It was difficult, but it was amazing. And at that point, I knew I wanted to move into technology. There was just something about the changes that we were seeing, the ability to accelerate scale, moving back into something that's technically a bit more challenging as well. So I missed, the system side of Goldman, but I had learned so much in terms of kind of practical business, how you raise money, how you build a brand, physical operations, that whole piece. So we actively decided that we would go separate ways from a career perspective.
You chose marriage and family over being business partners, right?
Yeah. And that's really important.
It's really amazing self-awareness of you both to recognize that, though, because so many people would have continued on that route because it's what you were doing, then would have looked around and gone, oh God, this has cost us our marriage here. So that's Yeah, impressive, full stop. Before we leave that chapter, a couple of other questions. If early 20 person is listening to this right now, where should they be looking for a similar opportunity? So if they don't have capital at play, but they want to get into a business like you did, where would you look now if you were doing that again?
It's a good question. So I think there are a lot of people, when they think about entrepreneurship, they just think about startups. And I think that's actually a very, very narrow view of the world. Like some of the largest companies that we have in the world are not tech companies. And they are incredibly successful and they have longevity, which a lot of tech businesses do not have. I think, we're in a world which is highly unpredictable, where there's a lot of change happening, but actually where you can get businesses off the ground in a much more cost-effective way. And so, starting something new and thinking about it from a bootstrap first perspective is what I would always give somebody in their early 20s looking at kind of starting that journey. Largely because you're going to make loads of mistakes at the beginning as well. So create a safe space where you can make those mistakes without having an investor looking over your shoulder all the time. Think about what exists in the market, which is 80% good enough. So when I started my business, I bought a lot of the equipment for the first store secondhand. Now, most people that go and want to, start this new, fancy chain, whatever, will go and buy brand new equipment.
They will.
So, there were pieces I picked up at auction for like nothing. And I knew that I was only going to get 18 months out of them. But by the time they then, completely depreciated in 18 months, I had the cash flow to invest in new ones.
But in your mind, you were running an experiment anyway. So that 18 months was the perfect period to...
Exactly. And I think it's, go into businesses knowing that there is a very high probability that you will fail. Get comfortable with failing and then look back at your business and think, how should I actually be building this? Because a lot of people will go out and say, right, I need to raise 20 million. Right? And you raise 20 million with blind optimism, and all you can see is this business is going to scale and it's going to be infinitely successful and your investors are going to love you. And they miss all of the reality of the fact that there is downside. And there's a real world where they could be left in a very, very difficult situation if that doesn't quite work. So it's not glamorous.
I think that's the key word. My advice would be that. Find the businesses that aren't. Like, as much as everyone's super excited about AI, look, my PhD's in data. I love it, okay? But everyone's trying to do that at the moment. So run towards the plumbers, the electricians, the bricklayers, the physical manual jobs that AI isn't going to replace and that no one wants to do at the moment. So we've just got part of the business that's effectively taking minority stake venture positions in the supply chain that we need to deliver the change on the ground. So we've just taken a minority in a herbivore manager who's controlling deer numbers. We're going to do that with fencers and tree planters and all these things, because without that supply chain, we can't deliver the change at scale we need. So it's exactly finding those type of businesses.
Yeah. And I think just, you'll learn along the way, and that will then help you understand how to crack those kind of more glamorous opportunities in a more sensible way. But I think those businesses are often overlooked, and I think there's a huge amount of value in them.
You mentioned the learning lessons while building a business. What's the biggest one you made? What's the biggest mistake you made during your build out?
I have made so many. First business. I'll give you some examples. So coffee business was built on real estate leases, 10-year leases. You can be on the hook for millions with no break clauses. So if one of your stores isn't working and you've taken it in a very, very prime location, that has the ability to sink your entire company. So think about business structure, think about all of the the T's and C's and the tiny details in every legal document that you sign. So
I'm inferring that you signed one that, with hindsight, you probably shouldn't have done. Okay. When you realised that, how did you process the emotions of, oh God, and move into how do I solve this scenario?
I think, if I'm being really honest, when you're building a business, there are oh God moments almost every day.
Daily, yeah, well, multiple times a day.
So, it's kind of, okay, this is today's issue. I jumped straight into what are we doing to fix it?
Just solve it.
Who do we need to speak to? What is the case that we need to put forward? How do we negotiate out of this? Knowing that it's going to take time.
Of course you did, because you learned that lesson at 6 years old when the window was broken and you just fixed the window.
Yeah.
Just swept it up and kept going.
Yeah.
Amazing story. How long did the process of deciding you might exit and the deal actually happening take?
Quite a long time. So with the coffee business, we actually had a failed acquisition first.
So many people have that situation because it's like the dress rehearsal, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And at the time, it can feel like the world has ended. It's such a huge disappointment. We sold the company in 2018. The failed acquisition was towards the end of 2016. And then resurrected talks in 2017. Now, the 2016 failed acquisition partly was because there was a shift in the market. So if you look at retail, that was when BHS went under. And so that sent then ripples across the rest of the retail space. It made investors incredibly risk-averse. It meant that, when you were down to that final IC decision, they decided that they were just going to wait and see.
I don't think people realize how many other peripheral macro factors affect deals. There's the joke that America sneezes and the world catches a cold, but literally Trump gets out of bed and says something ridiculous. It can have knock-on effects of businesses across sectors people wouldn't even consider.
Yes, exactly. And I think when you're in that world and you're building, you think everything is a reflection of you and your work. And I would say this is probably one of the biggest learnings that I've had across the different businesses that I've built and the exits that I've had is most of the time it's not about you. Most of the time it is because something has shifted on the other side, something shifted in the macro space. There is some dysfunction or disagreement on their board, for example, that you know nothing about and you don't have any visibility of, but you still have to turn up with good intentions and not get into that point where, you think everybody on the other side is an enemy.
Which your point about bootstrapping and building it out, because if it's you and your investment, then you can have that coherent thing of, look, we couldn't control this just happened. If you've got a very aggressive group of investors, they're going to tell you it's your fault, whether it is or not, and you're still going to have to justify it.
Yeah. And that's hard. That is very, very hard. And I think it is something that a lot of people are experiencing right now. And I think particularly first-time founders get it the most. Even I've experienced it. When you're sitting here saying, I've built businesses before, I've exited businesses before, that gives you a certain amount of credibility and trust from your board that you don't get as a first-time founder. And so there is so much of, the market moving slightly against you, or you might have lost that big deal because something happened on the client side that you don't know anything about, but it gets put down to they messed up that deal. They didn't know what they were doing. And that's really, really difficult because there's only so much you can say, and that's not necessarily going to change their mind. The only thing that you can do is move on to the next deal and make sure you nail that next deal. Now, obviously, in a difficult market, take longer for that next deal to come through.
That's my coaching to young people. If you ever make a mistake or something negative happened, whether it's on you or not, just start stacking the wins the next day. The smallest win you can find, get it, and then get the next one and get the next one. And I think momentum powers you so far through this.
Yeah.
In the coffee chain phase, did you have a board at that point, or had you built it such that it was just you guys?
It was us. We had our funding providers. It was mostly debt that we had, and we had a small amount of equity. But it meant that the bank that had given us the debt funding for the business had a huge impact on what decisions we were able to make and what directions we were able to take. And that's, one of our most difficult situations was we decided to go through a rebrand and the bank didn't agree with that and they pulled our funding. And the rebrand was the right thing to do because it's ultimately what led to our exit. It's where we saw the broader market going. We were leaning much more into being independent and boutique, which you look at the coffee market now, that makes a lot of sense. This is 10 years ago. And it just meant that they could, with debt, you're like, oh, well, actually, we disagree on this thing. We're invoking the right of, whatever is in the loan agreement.
Yeah.
Off it goes.
People think the money's the difficult bit. It's always the terms.
Yes.
Like what is the actual cost, and not in terms of the interest rate. What's the control? What's the difficulty?
Yeah.
Always read your documents and have a good lawyer. When you were thinking about exit, did you know what you were going to do after the exit?
I knew that I was going to leave as part of the exit.
Okay.
I didn't know what I was going to do after.
Interesting. How did the exit impact you in terms of identity? Because that had been other than family, that had been your focus for 7 years. So how did it affect you on a personal level when you suddenly the next morning was like, oh, I don't have to do this anymore?
I want to say I felt really great. The reality was I felt really lost. Like I had absolutely no idea what to do with myself or my time. I found that so much of my identity had been tied to the business that now belonged to somebody else. To the extent that after selling that business, I have never been back to a single one of my coffee shops.
Do you think you ever will?
No, because I don't know whether it's your first business or whether it's just I grew as a person whilst that business was growing. That handing it over to somebody else and being able to have that separation of this doesn't belong to me anymore, and actually they have every right to do with it what they want to do with it, I just found very, very difficult at the time. So there was a real period where I struggled for quite a while to say, okay, what am I going to do now? I was incredibly burnt out as well. Realised that I love working. I love building. And
did you consider for a second you might not work again?
No, I knew I would work. I think my husband would have killed me if I tried not to, because I would have been a nightmare. But should I do something different? Should I go back to academia or something? I loved my time when I was studying. Should I go back there? Should I go into the investment side of things? And after a little bit of time, realised that I was an operator through and through.
So, unsurprisingly, my identity is quite tied to what we do, as you sit with one of our logos behind you. I don't want to go anywhere anytime. We had an approach recently, someone wanting to buy the business at a ridiculous number. And there was a question about how long do you want to do this for? And so many other things you talked about echo, because I'm like, I'm just happy to be here. Yeah. This is brilliant. I get to do this every day. This is amazing. I can't imagine not doing it. So having been through that process of the exit, if you were going to do another one, how would you prepare differently for it? How might you, although I suppose maybe it'd be better just by being the second or the third because you've been through it before.
Yeah, I mean, Truva was a really interesting one because Truva was a business I moved into after the coffee shops.
How big was it when you went in?
So it was pre-Series A, so it's still quite early stage.
How many people?
Gosh, I think I might have been 30, 40.
Okay, so it's still, like, that's not tiny. That's still a significant business that's, there are things in place. There's finance, there's HR, there's process. You're not building everything like you did before.
No. But it was a technology company. And what was really interesting was I went into that feeling like such an imposter. I had scaled and exited a company. I was the only person in the room that had scaled and exited a company, and it was run by first-time founders.
How on earth do you get imposter syndrome? But
I did not have a tech background. And it was so interesting. I went in and was like, look, I want to learn. I know how to build. And they said, okay, well, come be our ops director. And it's like, fine, brilliant. I don't want to worry about fundraising, paying the bills, any of that stuff for a little while. I just want to go back to actually being in the weeds and doing the work. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I only got 6 months of it though, but it was brilliant. And, really seeing how much I could take from what I had done before and apply it in what a lot of people in tech are like, oh, boring businesses. Okay, they're completely different. They don't scale like we do. Actually, they do. Some of them scale incredibly quickly. And there's a lot of transferable knowledge between the two. A lot of business principles still apply. But then within 6 months, I was promoted to the COO and then eventually became the CEO. So, clearly anything that you learn in building a business helps you accelerate the next one that you go into. But the Truva exit was really interesting because that came about in a very different way to the coffee chain. So we just had COVID. We were a homewares and lifestyle e-commerce marketplace platform. We worked with small businesses. So that was kind of the impact side of things for me of we helped thousands of families stay liquid through COVID. We helped them get an income. And our numbers were obviously fantastic. We were pretty close to break even. And then post-COVID, things started to open up again. Now, what was really interesting in that situation was that there were certain signals coming from the customer acquisition space. Now, at Truva, I had run almost every department bar the engineering team and finance at that point. But marketing was something I'd spent a lot of time in. And marketing actually is very, very similar to being on a trading floor and getting your indicators in terms of costs and pricing and, volumes and impressions and all of this data. And there was something in the market that I was like, the consumer market's really starting to pinch and acquisition costs are going to go through the roof. We've got an incredible set of numbers. So we have two options at this stage. Do we exit on a high while we still have a very healthy growth trajectory ahead of us? Or do we go and raise a big Series C, knowing that organic growth is going to be much more difficult in 6 months' time? And so that was the conversation to take to the board and say, look, these are our two options. Actually, this is why we think it's probably a good time to exit the business. And at least for the next 3 to 5 year window in the consumer space, this is probably the best valuation you're going to get. That was like trading desk 101. So we actually then agreed the terms for the exit to made in the January of the year that the consumer market then crashed.
So give me that timeline from when you started thinking, this might be the right answer. When did that happen?
So this was when we were starting to come out of lockdown. So 2021, like mid to late 2021.
So then how long till the board said, yeah, we agree?
End of 21.
Okay. And then?
And we completed the sale to Made in May 22.
Okay. That's 5 months for that, or 5-6 months is quick still.
Yeah.
Did you work with a corporate finance partner to do it?
So this one actually came about because our board, one of the investors on our board knew the CFO there. And so actually really using those partnerships and then those relationships to have the conversations and also to have the airtime to map out what that acquisition scenario looks like. I find that corporate finance partners, like if you go down that route to sell your company, you've already devalued your company by 50%.
That's interesting.
You sell when you're not for sale. And as soon as you say you're for sale, immediately people start thinking either distressed asset or I'm able to get it for whatever I want. And the corporate finance partner typically has some fixed fee that they're going to get regardless. And so they win even if you don't win. So we didn't go down that route. And I think that was the right thing at the time. I think even now, I'm still quite skeptical of them for an exit.
Fascinating. And the emotional process of that exit presumably felt very different.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, exits are exhausting.
And they take longer than everyone thinks they will or hopes they do.
Yes. And the due diligence and, as much as you want to delegate away the due diligence, nobody knows your business better than you do. So you have to stay incredibly close to it. I think Truva was definitely less emotional as an exit. I think because I stayed with the business, I intended to stay with the business, and we retained our independence within the MAID organization. And so for us, it was actually, we're joining this much bigger group. Obviously, it's a public company at that point. We're still going to retain our core identity.
How long did they ask you personally to stay for afterwards?
So I was tied in for 18 months.
Okay, that's quite short, relatively.
It's not too bad, yeah.
I had a friend who was asked to do 10 years and agreed to 7 and went a lot quicker than that, but was asked to do 10.
I imagine that's quite painful.
I mean, it's just not, how is anything realistic for 10 years?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
It's just like, almost that makes it fine to go sure, because nothing's going to last 10 years. So.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
18 months. I mean, it didn't end up being 18 months because obviously we had the MAID collapse that happened 4 months later. So yeah, that turned into an interesting exercise because Truva was actually the company that I exited twice in 6 months. Both of them very, very different. But, the team were amazing. We really actually believed in the value to Truva being part of MAID and the value to MAID of having Truva be part of the group. And so there was a lot of value creation in that acquisition that we could get on with.
When that feels authentically correct, that's the beauty of a partnership.
Yeah.
When you have to really flex the narrative around it, I just think you're struggling at that point.
Exactly. And, there's just, for me, it could really step change the scale at which we were operating. And because Truva was about supporting these small businesses, if we scale, they scale. And so there was a real kind of really clear linear, path in terms of that impact of benefits to MAID top line and benefits to small businesses that we're working with. And so from a mission perspective, that felt really, it rang true for everyone in the business. And actually we lost very, very few people on that journey, part of that acquisition.
So how on earth do we go from that eclectic business mix to NatureMetrics?
So I, after selling Truva for the second time, realised that it was time for me to move on at that point. And kind of once again had this whole piece around, what do I want to do next, etc. But I felt like I had kind of one operating gig left in me. But I knew that the impact at that point was really, really important. Like Truva had really confirmed that for me. The fact that, we were getting emails from these families saying, you've helped me pay my rent, or, you've helped me buy Christmas presents for my kids this Christmas. Like that meant so much more to me than the financial return that I was getting from that company, and which, the way it played out didn't come through. But I knew that I wanted to stay in the impact space. I've always, at that point, I'd started doing more social impact work outside of work as well. So doing much more work with underprivileged founders, supporting female founders and entrepreneurs, but also working with young people in East London. So people kind of from backgrounds like me, helping them navigate things like getting their first work experience, internships, access to universities, that kind of thing. And, all kind of free time, unpaid, but incredibly rewarding. And, I still genuinely believe in the opportunity for technology to accelerate impact. I hadn't done a lot of work in climate. And at the time, NatureMetrics was looking for a CEO. So I had a headhunter reach out to me and say, I have this incredible business. They're in the biodiversity space. They're looking for a new CEO. Let me send some information on them. And I remember the first thing I said to them was, I'm not a scientist. Like, I haven't done science in GCSE. And it's like, we have the most incredible scientists. We need a commercial leader to help us work out how to scale this business so that it has the impact that we know it can have. So I was like, okay, let kick off the process and have the conversation. Very, very early on, I fell head over heels in love with the product. And that was the piece for me where I was like, there is something here that I think can not just change the way that we monitor biodiversity or we conduct ecological surveys, but we have something here that could actually have systemic change in the way that economies are operating. And so kind of going all the way back to, like, I did a master's in development economics at Yale, going back to all of the things that I had learned theoretically there, combining it with a lot of the reality that I picked up on the trading floor and building businesses and being like, this feels really worthwhile. But actually, I think that this product could be the game-changing piece that we need to not just build a more sustainable future, but fundamentally change the way that businesses operate. And that for me was really, really interesting.
So most of the focus around this sector has been carbon-based so far because the markets are in place and things like that. How important do you think the measurement side of biodiversity nature is to stimulating those markets like BNG and nature credits and things?
Yeah. So I think carbon's an interesting one because it's intangible, right? Nobody says, oh, I'm looking at carbon.
Conceptually, it should be a harder market to start.
Yes.
I think they've got it the wrong way around. But
we simplified it, right? We said we can measure it, it's transferable, and therefore we're able to build a market around it. The difficulty with it not being tangible is you see what has happened over the last 12 months, right? It's invisible, it's very easy to then forget about. Nature is so different because it is tangible. Now, it's obviously quite difficult to measure because of its complexity. It's incredibly localized, but it is so visible. And I think the difference between carbon and nature is fundamentally critical infrastructure in a way that carbon is not as obviously the case.
Bring that to life, people. Bring how critical nature is into our everyday lives in a way that people could comprehend.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're literally looking at things like the quality of our waterways, the level of pollutants in an atmosphere. We're looking at, our soil microbiome, which determines how healthy our soils are, which then obviously feeds through to the level of yields that we're getting, which fundamentally as consumers plays out in food prices and all the inflation that we've been seeing over the last few years. All of the kind of the massive climate disasters that we've seen more recently around flooding, like what impact does that then have in terms of our supply chain resilience? It's literally everywhere. But we have an economic system at the moment that because it can't price it, it overlooks it. And this means that we're always going to be in a remediation phase. We're always going to be having to pay recovery costs, restoration, when actually, if we just factored in the value of it in the first place, we'd end up with healthier ecosystems, but actually your balance sheet would look a lot better because you wouldn't have this future restoration costs coming at you that you need, because otherwise your entire business model is going to collapse.
So can you give us almost a customer journey type experience whereby the information and the data you provide is impacting a business? Like maybe you don't have to go company specific, but sector specific?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, if we take the consumer route, because I think that is the one that people are probably going to be the most familiar with. Some of the work that we're doing with one of our largest clients, very, very well-known household name, is we are working with their dairy division and, their kind of syndicate of farmers and really helping them understand the quality of their soil. Now, what they want to do is they want to move towards regenerative outcomes. Part of that, though, is getting trust from the people on the ground that this is actually going to be good for them, because there are certain practices that are so deeply entrenched in the way that a lot of these systems operate. Fertilizer usage, for example. When you're going and saying, well, actually, I think this is going to give you a better outcome in terms of yield, save you money, etc., there's still raised eyebrows unless you have the hard data to back that up. They're going to say, well, actually, why are you asking me to change the way I operate? I've been doing it this way for years. If you want to change those behaviors and those practices, this is where actually objective data can go a long way.
And these are farmers and landowners who have worked a certain way, often for generations. are not now in an economic position where they can hedge this bet.
No.
Like if they get one bad year, that can be the end of a farm. So you ask them to try something, jump out of a plane with no parachute and no backup plan of any kind.
Exactly. And I think, being really aware of how the economics of those different supply chains work, because the margins at the farm level are not great. They can't be paying millions and millions of pounds for cutting edge technologies and solutions without the support of those massive multinational buyers further up that supply chain. And I think it's connecting those stakeholders that is really, really important in making the economics of nature restoration viable as well. And so, we've worked with them. We've been able to prove that there has been a biodiversity uplift and the changing practices that they've been encouraging, which is really fantastic. But it then helps them scale that with, we've proven this out in these countries. Now let's extend that across other geographies. What we will then see in terms of impact on the consumer is a better quality product at a better price. I mean, that's a win-win situation, but also in the long term, a more resilient supply chain where they're not going to have to say, oh, my strawberries in this region have failed, and therefore I need to be importing them thousands and thousands of miles to meet the consumer demand, but at twice the price.
There's so many aspects to your business. It's fascinating. So you're at the cutting edge of a technology in a market that is forming and doesn't really exist yet. You've then got to build a commercial model for the use of that technology into a market that doesn't fully exist yet. How do you balance your thinking and your time across the commercial, the marketing, the branding, the tech, the science side of it? Because it's just beautifully complex.
It is.
That's why you like it, because it's intellectually complex.
I do. I know. Sometimes I really ask what I'm doing, but there's beauty in that complexity because the hardest problems are often the most important to solve.
Yeah.
And with this one, we know that, our product is grounded in a high level of scientific integrity, right? That the scientific rigor is central to everything that we do and everything that we put out. It is indisputable in the sense that, like, if it is not good enough, it does not go out. We have to be able to stand behind it. What that does mean, though, is when we think about the data that we've generated, we have high integrity data sets that we can then build everything else on top of. And to some degree, when you think about NatureMetrics, it's been around 10 years. I mean, we've been looking at biodiversity before it was even, a thing. And it does mean that we've been able to put down those critical foundations on which we're now able to build in a way that somebody coming into the market today couldn't. And so, the insights that we're giving our clients, they're not proxies. They're based on real tangible data. And the benefit of that, though, is it's auditable, it's verifiable, it's traceable. It's all of the things that, when you think about financial data, it's all the things that businesses need to drive change that they will put investment behind. And so for me, in a scale up, there'll be days where, like, let's put these fires out because, something hasn't quite gone to plan. And there'll be other days where I will have the most fascinating conversations with other players in the space who are either picking up slightly different market signals or where we're finding opportunities to combine forces and actually tackle something for a client in a more seamless way.
How likely is it that with the amazing scientists you've got, you actually end up with developments and scientific breakthroughs that undermine things you've done in the past? I think about, and we'll come on to AI, but think about the evolution of data centers. Daniel Priestley wrote this amazing thing yesterday. It was like, when we were building railroads and infrastructure assets, we thought these things would last 100 years. We're about to invest trillions of dollars in data centers that we know will be obsolete in 2 years. So with the amount of scientific progress you're making, there's a real chance you will end up undermining your own previous work because that's how science evolves. Yeah. Do you guys talk about that and the risk associated with being really good at what you do?
Innovation sits at the center of who we are as a business, right? I mean, the product spent so long in R&D before it even reached the market, and we still have a lot of investment happening in R&D. So last year we launched DNA, which is actually being able to use swabs to detect DNA that's been transferred by air, for example. And we know that, the inevitability of innovation is that there will always be something new, something better. We have to stay at the forefront of that. Why I'm not worried, though, is our data sets are a point in time. And it is impossible to take this new technology, go back 5 years, and apply it across a project that you have already monitored. So, all of our historic data, it might not be using, the technology that we're going to see come in 10 years' time, but it's the most accurate snapshot we have of what 5 years ago looked like. And there is a huge amount of value in that, because when we're thinking about nature, it's something that takes time to recover. And we need to be able to see those trends over a longer term time frame. So yes, things absolutely will get more accurate, they'll get more detailed. We need to maintain the ability to be able to stitch together different technologies across different time periods so we're able to pick up those signals.
Love it. How much is AI impacting the way the business works and you work personally?
So AI for us is 3 things. So one is, how do you bring it into your product, which, obviously we've had some amazing product releases over the last 12 months, which show that we are using a lot of AI modeling, particularly on the risk side of things. But for us as a business, it's got to be embedded in the way that we operate. And then the third piece is really that culture of, thinking about technology as an enabling factor in how we scale. We've had to spend a lot of time as a scale up thinking about how we can use AI to drive efficiency. Pockets are not as deep as they used to be 2-3 years ago. And you need to be thinking about your runway and your burn and the unit economics all the time, right? Because particularly with the market being quite unpredictable, you'd have no idea what's going to hit you in 12 to 18 months. And so any incremental efficiencies that you're able to drive today actually just give you that added bit of buffer for any future shocks that you might hit. So when we've been thinking about AI, it's literally across everything. It can be across like admin. How do we speed up some of that without having to massively increase our headcount? But it's also really thinking about how we can use AI to improve our service to our clients as well. We can't be one and done with our clients. You can't take a snapshot of nature and say, great, I've nailed it. I know what it looks like today. You need to be working with them over 5, 10, 15-year horizons. And these are clients who, many of whom are quite early on their journey. It would be incredibly labor intensive for us to educate every client individually, explain every single data set individually. How do we use AI to do that hand-holding, give them what they need, whilst also building a scalable delivery model? I think every organization that is going through a period of rapid scaling has got to be embedding AI into the way it works.
I hadn't thought about the fact that because you have a scientific cutting edge product, that almost the onboarding costs and the acquisition costs of a client inherently have to be quite high, because you're having to explain what is possible with the science.
Yeah.
It's not like you can't go, everyone knows what a can of Coca-Cola does. You don't have to educate a client on that, right?
Exactly. And you also need to be able to explain it to them in their terms.
Yeah, and that's sector specific and completely different each time.
Exactly. And, for us, yes, we have a single product that can serve multiple sectors, multiple different applications and multiple different use cases. And, we fundamentally have a choice. Do we say, well, we're only working in this one sector for this specific use case. We're going to narrow the focus. We're going to nail that. And then we'll move on to the next sector and then the next sector, by which point the ship has sailed and we've got nature Armageddon.
And it's incredibly high risk, because which is the sector that's going to go?
Exactly. Or we think about how we can build a product that is configurable. It has the flexibility to be able to communicate with those different sector needs, but do it in a way that we're also building retention and long-term relationships with our client. It's got to be meaningful to them as well.
I think we need to get you in a studio with various different members of your team, and it's almost like the way that OpenAI does its product launch videos, where it's like, right, we do this for this sector, it's this, and you almost have a 5 to 10 minute short thing of this is how it could help your business and sector. Maybe that's the next distressed industry, the TV industry, and we'll collectively buy a recording studio and roll those out. You mentioned the culture word in that last answer. I have a two-part question on this. One is, you are working with such a diverse array of skill sets, backgrounds, experiences, and people. How do you unite those around a single culture at NatureMetrics?
So I was talking to my VP of people about this yesterday. So we're in the process of redefining our values. And there's one phrase that she said that really stood out to me. It was, we're individually diverse, but we're collectively brilliant.
Oh, that's nice.
And actually, I really believe that we are. And when you look at the business, of course, we've had that slightly teenage growing pain where we went from being a team that was full of scientists to starting to bring in commercial people at the point at which the business has got to start commercially scaling.
How long have you been in role now?
I am almost 3 years.
Okay, and how has the business changed in numbers over that period?
So when I joined, we were over 150 people.
Okay.
We're now so we went down to about 110 and we're now about 130.
And the composition's different, right?
The composition has completely shifted, yeah. I mean, when I joined, it was very science heavy, and people had sector expertise, either because they knew the space, so they either knew energy really well or conservation really well, or they had deep ecological expertise. The business, even today, doesn't have a lot of generalists. You know, the kind of hires that you might make in an early stage tech company where you don't need somebody that's brilliant at marketing, you just need some doers. What we had to do, I would say about 2 years ago, is start to shift the business to get, I would say now we have an equal balance between operational commercial people and scientists. And I think
looking from afar, it's definitely that's visible from a market perspective from, I would have said, incredibly passionate and dedicated to the science side of things 3 and beyond years ago, whereas now looking much more like a fully rounded business with the functions and commercial appetite and ideas in place. That's definitely, I was surprised when you said it was 3 years, but I'm completely losing track of time now. But it has changed, definitely.
Yeah, and I think, we have to remember that your background does not determine what mission you believe in. I don't need a PhD in ecology to really deeply care about the NatureMetrics mission. And that is the thing that, brings the team together. We have a shared set of values, and we have a shared mission, and we're all pulling in the same direction. And fundamentally, if you have people in a business who are all well-intentioned and high integrity, which is very, very important, then that, once you've got through that initial phase of working out how we all fit together, and building trust as well, like making sure that, the science side of the business really trusts the commercial team's ability to take something to market, to not make things up and sell things that don't exist, and the commercial team trusting that the science team isn't going to hold things back. Once you have that really gives you a strong foundation to scale.
I think the absence of you having a PhD in ecology allows the business to talk to itself. Because I think if you had, often the scientists end up running everything, which make it very difficult. I quite like the fact people forget I've got a science/data background and just think I do marketing. It's quite nice.
Yeah, I think also you have to get very used to saying you don't know. And
you wouldn't have been as comfortable earlier in your career, right? Because you mentioned about when you first went back into some of the tech focus, you had that imposter sense of things. Whereas I loved when you went, I don't need a PhD in ecology to do this.
Yeah, it's definitely, there's a level of, I would say, a confidence that you can say, I'm not the expert here. I'm here to listen to the experts. Tell me what you think. Give me your opinion. What I can do is join all of those dots, understand our constraints, and build a plan. And also coming into the space knowing that I deeply understand how businesses operate. my economics background is so important when we're thinking about that complex stakeholder landscape within which we're trying to build and operate. That's what I bring to the table. And I think with a lot of these science-first businesses, and to find somebody that has a PhD in ecology, knows, economics and deeply understands like regulatory landscapes, knows technology, all of these things. I mean, that's a unicorn. They don't exist. And the team, to be fair, have been fantastic. There's never any point at which I've said, guys, I have no idea how this thing works, where someone turned around and been like, well, you're an idiot. They're like, don't worry, I will explain
People
it to you.
love explaining their stuff.
They do.
Especially when they're not having to do it 50 times, but people love explaining it. So it gives them an opportunity to be proud of what they're doing.
I have learned so much from them. And I continue to learn so much from them. And I think that is so important, because I think that is the part that, wherever you go next, you will take with you all the things that you have learned from the people around you.
I think that's the story of your podcast. Like you can absolutely see the loops of where in one chapter you were picking up a skill and then you've applied it later and picking up the next one and applied it. There's such a clear connection of those. You almost set yourself up for a question when we started about figuring out what your superpower is. What do you think it is now?
No.
Wait, and I'll give you two answers. One is the one that you would say is the quick answer on stage. And then what's the real one that if you were sat at home by yourself, is your superpower?
I'm a very, very good dot connector. I'm very good at seeing lots of what look like quite disparate data points and understanding the link between them, but also then the quickest way to navigate them or turn them into a plan. So I would say that is probably why I really, really need data points. Like I struggle in businesses where they put CEOs in ivory towers and don't feed them all the information except on a need-to-know basis. Like I find that really
So how do you make
stifling.
sure you do get the information honestly?
I mean, the benefit is I'm very open with people in terms of how I work and what I need to do my best work. There's also a sense of, for me to do my best work, you need to give me X. But if I'm doing my best work, I will help you unlock and achieve all of these other things. So, I'm here to make you great. How do I help you?
It's why I'm insistent that I lean into playing like people can take the mick out of me. Because my thought process goes, if people can't joke and be honest around me, what else are they not being honest about? And whenever something goes terrible, I overly welcome it, like, cool, no problem. Because as soon as you hit back and go, that's awful, you're not hearing about the next one.
You lose them. Yeah, exactly. And then I guess the answer that I would tell you if I was sitting at home, I am really, really good in a crisis. Not a personal crisis. I'm terrible in a personal crisis. I'm very, very good in a work crisis. However, I deeply dislike it. I am feeling far too old to be dealing with work crises on a regular basis. But it is something that I have definitely learned over the course of my career is when they talk about wartime, I'm very, very good at wartime. It is not what I want to define my career going forward, though. So that is definitely the one that I would hold back and only tell you if I was at home.
You're amazing. What's the one question that I haven't asked you wish I had?
I think the one question that people do ask me quite a lot, actually, typically when I come down off speaking events, which I find really interesting, is what would you go back and tell a younger version of yourself? And I find this a really, really interesting question. So I'm going to ask you that question as well.
I have an outside feeling we might have the same answer, but go on.
So, and any changes depending on the conversation that we've had. But if I were to go back and I was going to speak to, 14-year-old Dimple, I would say the one piece of advice I would have is to not believe in yourself, but it's to believe in your ability to work it out much more. It's a conviction. And I think this is partly a female thing, partly tied to the background that I've come from. But it is such a defining factor in whether you succeed or not later. And it is conviction, particularly when you are building something. And it's not blind conviction in the sense of I'm going to build this thing and it's definitely going to work. It's conviction in I trust in myself to be able to work out a way. And if I do not work out a way, it's because a way does not exist.
That's great. So the answer's similar, but expressed in a different way. And I've never seen it. It was only with you talking that I visualized it in this way. So I would walk up. I'd see a younger Rich. So I was a miserable child. I had a horrible childhood. I didn't enjoy any aspect of it. And I would walk up to myself with the intention of saying, it'll be fine. Just keep going. You'll figure it out. It'll be fine. But I'd stop myself telling me that because I think I needed to be scared and needed to fight my way out of it to do it. And if someone had said to me, look, you're going to achieve things you're not even going to dream about, like you're going to have an amazing wife and healthy, happy kids, and you're going to have a business that's beyond the one you could imagine, I might take my foot off the gas and not get there. So I would stop myself giving that advice, but the advice would be the one you described, that you'll figure it out. And actually the other wrinkle of that is, or if you put enough positivity into the world, you'll be able to surround yourself with people who, if you can't figure it out, they can.
Yeah.
And that's when it comes together. Thank you so much for doing this. You are so busy. It's been an absolute treat to have you on the show. So
thank you for having me.
Thank you.